Hello everyone. In the beginning of this chapter, we're going to take a look at empty objects. Now, an empty object is a null object, which means that although it does have transformations such as location and rotation and scale, it doesn't render, ever. Which basically means it's usually used to parent things for animation or to cause a constraint on something. Let's take a look at that. I've set up 3 cubes and I've gone to my right orthographic view. And now I'm going to add in an empty object. So I will hit Shift A and I'll come down here to empty. And we see we have all sorts of choices. We don't need to worry about the choices right now. We're going to start out just looking at plane axes. And I'm going to move to 1, and I'm going to slide this out. Now I'll turn a little bit, and I'll turn off my manipulator widget so that you can see our empty object, which has points going in every axis. And as I said, with that selected, if we go up, we have a location for it and a scale for it, and if we were to rotate it, we would show rotation for it as well. Now, what's so handy about this? Well, like I said, most of the time this is handy when we deal with animation. If I were to select all of my cubes, and then my empty object, I could hit Control P and parent my cubes to my object. And I'll pop back into 3 here. If I hit Grab, I now get movement on all of my objects. Now in this simple case, it is true that I could have parented these together without the empty object and gotten the same result. However, further down the line when we get into animation, you'll see how these can be useful. It's also useful to note that we can create or duplicate empty objects, and we can also parent an empty object to another empty object. And when we get into animation, you'll really see where that's useful. But for example, I could animate this empty object to rotate at 360 degrees, which would rotate my cubes. And I could have it parented to another empty object that I had moving back and forth along the X axes. And then we would have this spinning that was working its way in and out like a drill. And that gives you some idea of just some of the basic things we can use when we have empty objects involved. Now, the other thing we can do with it, and I'm going to stop that. The other thing we can do with it is use it as a constraint. So if I were to select my camera object, oops, see how bad I am about that left clicking? And say I wanted my camera object to always focus on where this was. I could select my camera object, and we're going to come over here to this thing that looks like a chain. That's our constraints key. And I'll add an object constraint. In this case, I'm going to go to my tracking menu and select Track 2. In my target, I can select my empty object. And you can see my camera gets all funky because it's connected by its pivot point here at the back. So we'll change our 2 to a -Z and our up to Y. And now you'll see we have it pointing directly at our object. What does that do for us? Well, if I then select my object and I grab it and I move it around, you can see my camera tracks it. Again, this can be extremely useful in animations. And if we actually go the other way, and I select my camera and grab that and leave this stationary, now my camera spins and tracks to that location. Now you may be wondering, why do I need the empty object? Why don't I just track the camera to the cube. Well, we could certainly do that. However, what if I want my camera to rotate like I'm doing here, pointing at this world 0, close to it anyway, position, but I want my cubes animated so that they're moving in and out of frame as my camera rotates? Well, that's where an empty object comes in. Now, again, there are all sorts of empty objects that we can add here. For the most part, you're just going to find them useful in how you keep track of things on screen. They will more or less do everything the same. In an upcoming video, however, we will look at how to put in background images for modeling. And then I will show you, after I've shown you the old-fashioned way of doing it in Blender, I will show you a way of doing it with an image empty object here, which you may actually find a lot more useful. But for now, we have an idea of how these work. We know we can hit Shift-A to find them. We know if we want to parent them, we can use Control-P to parent them to objects or to each other. And we know if we want to use them as a constraint, that we have a constraint menu up here that we can access to constrain values to it. That'll do it for now. So I will see you in the next video.